Hello and warm welcome to today's episode where I want to talk about open mirroring and specifically about mirroring Snowflake Views using open mirroring. So open mirroring is the technique in Microsoft Fabric to basically do a near real-time replication of any kind of data source, and this is especially useful for data sources where there isn't already an out-of-the-box mirroring. If you're a little bit confused about these different techniques, I made a whole decision guide on finding like the most valuable approach or most efficient approach to load specific data sources. But open mirroring is definitely something to have a look at when you don't find a suitable out-of-the-box solution. And Snowflake Views are actually not supported by the out-of-the-box functionality within Microsoft Fabric. So I thought I'd take this as an example to show you how open mirroring works. So I have the whole solution packed up in notebooks in my GitHub repo, which I will share the link in the description below of this video, and I will show you in this video how to set it up. So there are no further questions. You can always kind of rewind the video and see how I set it up, and so that you have no problems to do the same. So I hope it works the same way as I do. If not, then please let me know, and I have to tweak it a little bit. So let's get started. So we start here in this GitHub repo, which is called Mirror Snowflake Views from myself. And the repo basically contains a README file giving you all the instruction how to set it up, and mainly like these three notebooks here. So the solution consists of these three notebooks. The first one, which is called Setup Resources, and this notebook, as the name suggests, sets up resources in Microsoft Fabric. That's mainly like a SQL database where we store some metadata about the views you want to mirror, and also like some kind of statistics about them. And you basically want to run this once for setting up a new mirroring solution. So it creates the database and the mirrored database item itself. The second notebook, which is called init mirror new views. That basically means if you want to include additional views to your mirroring routine. So the idea is that you have some kind of routine running which is synchronizing multiple views. If you want to include new views to this routine, you can run this notebook again. It basically helps you on adding this metadata to the aforementioned SQL database, and it will run some automation process to setting up everything for the mirroring itself. And probably the most important one is sync Snowflake Views, and this you want to actually run as often as you like, or you can also set it up that it will run continuously, however you want to do this. Running the notebook once will basically pick up the metadata from the SQL database and retrieve all the views or the kind of definition of the views to know what to mirror to Microsoft Fabric and to which target, and will do so in transferring the data. So this is kind of the data transfer process itself, and you might want to schedule that as often as you like. What are kind of the prerequisites to set up the solution? You obviously need to have some Snowflake account which has access to those views you want to mirror, and also permission to create some additional views in the tables in the same schema of that view. On the Microsoft Fabric side, you want to have an account which has at least contributor rights on a target workspace to set up some resources. That includes also being able to use like a SQL database and a mirrored database item. And what you want to do is also to have like a service principal, which we need for some automation, which you also want to give contributor rights on this target workspace in Microsoft Fabric where you set this up. Optionally, but highly recommended, is Azure Key Vault. So for all the credentials, that's mainly the credentials of the service principal, but also for the Snowflake account, the connectivity credentials, you want to store them securely and not directly in a code. So I highly recommend to use Azure Key Vault. Obviously, you can hard code these credentials if you want to do that, but as hard coding credentials and code is typically not a good idea. So having said that, so how does this look like? I have my Snowflake account here. I have some schema here with some tables and views, and watch. So I have like kind of this fact table here in the middle with about like 49 million rows. And I created this very nice view here, which aggregates my sales. So basically taking this fact table about sales, joining it with those dimensional tables, and then obviously doing some kind of aggregations, where I have like the aggregated fields here, or like this group by fields, but also like some kind of sum of sales or other metrics I want to see in this view. So I have this view already created. And if I run like this count, I see it has like 148,000 records. So obviously, if there are some new metrics coming in the fact table, this will obviously also change my view. And what I want to do with the mirroring solution is basically to have this near real-time replication that I see like the changes in this view replicated to Microsoft Fabric in a mirror database as a table. On the Fabric side, I start with a new workspace here. I basically give it a nice name and assign it to some Fabric capacity. The Fabric capacity SKU doesn't really matter here. And on this workspace, as I mentioned, I want to have the rights for myself. And so I'm admin obviously, but contributor would be enough. And I want to add the service principal, which has the which I want to use for automation, which should also have contributor rights. So once this is done, I can actually start. The first step I want to do is basically I want to get the notebooks out of this repository. So you can download or clone this, or you download the notebooks individually, however you like it. You go to this Microsoft Fabric workspace and import the notebooks to this from this repository to this workspace. So basically click the import button now and select those files from my local device. So I have like these notebooks here now from the GitHub repo. I click on upload and it's importing these 3 files now to my workspace. So now that these notebooks have been uploaded, you want to go to this setup resources notebook and open it. And what we want to do is basically configuring here in this first cell. I mean, if you run it here in the notebook, you can also run it locally. If you run it in the notebook and leave the default values, then all the resources will be created in exactly this workspace here. So the workspace you're operating in. So this is what I will show here. If you want to specify a different workspace where you want to create the SQL database and the mirror database item, you can specify this by providing here workspace ID. You can also change how the SQL database should be called and the mirror database name as well. But if you're happy with it, creating it in your workspace with these nice names, then just run the defaults here. At the beginning, it's installing a library here. That's the Python SDK, which I also developed to call the Fabric REST APIs in the background, which helps you to set up some resources yeah, in on behalf of you without doing a lot of clicks. So session started in 13 seconds. The installation should be also pretty quickly here. And if I run the script here, then it will actually create this database item, and then it will create some tables and views within this database, and in the end it will also create a mirror database item for me. So just in this moment, the mirror database item is also created. I mean, we can have a quick check here. So let's check out the workspace again. We see we have like this database item, secret database item. We have the mirrored database item. If we look at the mirrored database item, we see it's still pretty empty. It's set up for using open mirroring. So it gives you like a link to the documentation. I see the mirrored database ID. That's actually something you want to keep in your clipboard or save it to a notepad or something. We will actually need this. So I'm just saving that one. And we see that there's nothing going on. The replication hasn't started yet either. If I look at the secret database item, what has actually happened there is it created two new tables and one new view. Like on this current version, I'm basically only using this metadata table. The other ones are not populated at the moment, but the idea of the other tables would be to track the successful mirroring or the unsuccessful mirroring iterations. But this metadata table here is specifying which kind of Snowflake views should be regarded in the mirroring routine. So you basically define what is the target, which kind of mirrored DB ID and workspace ID should I use to find like the mirror database item I want to mirror to, and then the information about the Snowflake connection, the database, the schema, the view name. The identifiers can be used for more advanced usage, which I will cover this in a different video where we'll deep dive in the solution itself. And the other values are also not are set by default. Also important here is the key vault, so best specifying the name of your Azure key vault so that it knows from where it should retrieve those credentials. Obviously, this is not important if you hard code the credentials and don't fetch them from key vault. So this is what is happening in the secret database. So I mean, you can also use something else to store the metadata if you don't want to use the secret database, but that's actually quite convenient to use that in that scope here. Next, what you want to do is init mirror new views. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I have this one Snowflake view I want to mirror, and what I will do here is installing these libraries again. So for the Python SDK for creating some resources, and as well the Snowflake connector Python library, which comes from the Snowflake side, which allows me to connect to my Snowflake instance via Python. And what I want to configure here is basically the mirror database ID I want to mirror to. So replace this value with the mirror database ID, which you find in this item for the, in this mirror database item, you will get prompted for that. Also, if you open it, you will find it in the URL. So this is what you want to fetch here. Don't worry in the notebook about some warnings. It's all good and functional. Here you could also specify if the secret database or this mirror database should be in some is in some kind of other workspace. If you run this within a Fabric and notebook and not locally, it will assume you run everything in one workspace and just fetch these IDs for you by fetching it from the same workspace this notebook is running in. What I need this for is basically for that part of defining new views. So basically, I put the new entries in this metadata table of the SQL DB, and these entries consist of a workspace ID. So this is where the mirrored database item lives, the ID of this mirrored database item, the Snowflake DB I want to use, the Snowflake schema I want to use, and the view name. So you basically get that from the Snowflake side. So I have like stream test database, stream test schema as a schema, and the view I want to mirror is called aggregate sale by date and city. So this is what I put here, and then the keyword, this is the name of the keyword which I have my secrets in. On the keyword side, so if you set this up, basically what you want to do is you have a keyword on Azure, and obviously your user needs to be able to read these secrets, and you want to set up those 6 secrets here. So for a current setup, I use user password authentication with Snowflake. I'm actually planning to also enable key pair authentication, but in this first version, I have this authentication here. So you put your Snowflake account, user, and password as secrets here, and also the service principal, which has rights on the workspace, contributor rights on the Fabric workspace. You set those credentials for this service principal over here. So the tenant ID, client ID, and client secret. And the name here of this keyword, that's the one you want to add in this entry in the database. So this is a list here. Yeah, you can add multiple entries at once. You can also add no new entry and just initialize the entries which are already there. So that could be the case if you fill these values in or like manually in the database. Feel free to do so. But in the end, you need to run this notebook to do all the initialization. So what this basically is doing, it sets some things up on the Snowflake side to kind of track which kind of changes have been already transferred, and also updates the metadata table. And this is all happening via this notebook here. So the notebook eventually was successful here, took like a minute or so. And you see there were some updates on the metadata table in the SQL database, but what is more interesting, it's also set up the mirror database. So it basically prepared the landing zone for the open mirroring of this table. I also uploaded this metadata JSON. We can also check that. So if I move to the mirror database item, I can see that the replication status is now running. So it's up and running and waiting for some new data coming in. And it also created like this landing point for this table here. So I mean, on the Fabric side, it would be kind of a table, so on the Snowflake side, a view, and we see that the status is also running. So once I land now data within the landing zone for this table / view here, then it will start the replication process. That means everything is set up and well. So basically the last part now is to use the Sync Snowflake Views notebook. As you typically don't want to run the notebook in interactive mode, but as a job, like a scheduled job, or as part of a data pipeline, so using an activity there to trigger it, you need to set up an environment, because you can't install the libraries on the fly anymore. You need to use an environment. So that's what I would do next. I click here on the new item button, I search for environment and give it a nice name. So create here, And now I can configure this environment. I could change something around the Spark properties and so on. But I just want an environment which allows me to install these or use these public libraries. So one is the Snowflake connector Python. It's also suggested here. And I want to use like this newest version. Another library I want to add is like my MS Fabric by SDK core, which allows me to interact with Fabric resources. I click Save here. And now as a next step, I will publish that environment. And this will actually take quite some time for whatever reason. So this can take up to 10 or 15 minutes. So don't worry, it eventually will end. But yeah, it's time to grab a coffee and come back later. You can always kind of watch kind of the progress here in this notification bar, but be prepared that it might take up to 10 or even 12, 13 minutes until this publishing is done. So eventually the publish process has been successful. For me it took like 13 minutes now. And with this environment set up, we actually want to jump into this third and last notebook here. So opening that up, what you want to do here is actually to set the environment. So basically I don't want to use the default, but I use the one which I just created in this workspace. What happens now is like I can run the first cell here. That this will take like 2.5 minutes now to spin up a notebook, just because it can't use like this out of the box serverless compute that needs to use your individually configured compute. So that's why you see like these 2.5-3 minute start time for the session. What we can have a look at in the meantime is you can configure this notebook to say what is the name of the database which contains like this metadata, like which kind of views should be mirrored into which targets. You can also set the workspace ID. So this is set up here like this. Yeah, so locally you always have to say in which kind of workspace does the SQL database live. If I run it in the notebook, I have the option here to use the workspace where this notebook runs. So yeah, this is kind of the overall idea here. If you run everything in a notebook, then you can stick with the defaults here. And what I will do is basically I grab like the connection details of this database, and then I retrieve all those entries from this metadata table I want to process. So in this notebook, basically you only have to configure the location of this SQL database which contains the metadata, so the workspace ID and the name, and that is it. And everything else you can just run the notebook, and it will kind of loop through all the views you have set up you want to mirror. And this is actually the notebook you want to run like as often as you like. I mean, you can, I don't know, run it every 5 minutes or so, whatever, however you want to set this up, how often you want to mirror the latest state of the view. So eventually this environment is up. So it took almost 3 minutes. Ignore the warnings again. I mean, as I mentioned, this will loop over all the views once. So you can set it up to schedule this to, I don't know, run every 10 or 5 minutes or whatever, or build a loop around this to run it continuously. That's however you want to like this to set up. And now it will kind of fetch all the um, views which needs to be mirrored. So it checks like in this metadata table what should be synchronized, showing me the latest one here. And this is exactly the one I want to mirror. So eventually I just run the whole script here. And in the end, yeah, so I run the whole kind of routine now for every table. And eventually I will see the data which is going to be transferred. So basically, I set it up that it has some kind of batches in there, so that it's not like trying to replicate, I don't know, 50 millions at once and reach some limitations. So it will basically use batches of 100k rows. I mean, the batch size is defined over here, so if you find you can replicate more, that's fine. That's up to you. And what I see now, it's actually already completed. So this took 37 seconds, less than a second, less than a second, 7 seconds, less than a second, 3 seconds. So basically it's under 1 minute that we had like the whole replication now of this view, of these so it had like two iterations here. The first batch, which had like 100,000 um, row counts, and then it had additional 48,000 inserts. There were no deletes, and it did the whole synchronization. I mean, you can check that. I mean, there have been no changes since, yeah, I read it like 1 minute ago. So what you would expect if you run the script again, that it will see there are no changes here. So you can run this as often as you like. It gives me, okay, there for this table, there are no inserts, there are no deletes, and all is good. Now I can check the same on the mirror database side. So if I click here on the mirror database, typically I need to refresh that page to see the changes. And you can see it just recently completed it, and it says it replicated 148,186 rows. I mean, I can also have a look at that by switching to the SQL Analytics endpoint and querying the data. So looking into the schema here, takes a little bit to refresh here, seeing the schema here and running a SQL query. I can see that there is some data. So I see all this kind of nice data with different data types. So it also the script is set up that it respects the data types. So I have like date types here. I have the strings here as it's done in the source, and as well like decimal numbers. And I mean, I can also make this a little bit simpler here, basically comparing the count. So in the end, we have 100,000 and 148,186, and on the other side, on the Snowflake side, this view has 148,186. What we can test now is basically to add some data in the underlying fact table, and this will eventually change how the aggregates look like. Not only that there are new values, like new combinations of data and city, but also like new values, right, for existing combinations. Yeah, that the sums of the values will eventually go up. So I can test this by saying, okay, I'm adding additional data to this fact table. So I'm just saying add data and load some data from my local device. So I'm uploading here like a couple of files, saying I want to upload this to this fact table. So once this is uploaded, let's just preview here. This should all match nicely, and now I can directly ingest it into the Snowflake table. So this is finally done. So I have ingested now additional 5 billion rows now to the fact table. This means if I go back to my script here, that in the fact table, I now have not 49 million, but 54 million. And in the aggregate view, it's not longer, what did we have? 100,048, but there eventually are some new combinations here, but also like there will be a lot of values which actually changed. And to mirror that, you eventually want to run this notebook continuously, but here for demo purposes, I just trigger a new run. And eventually we see what will going to happen there. So we see that after these 30 seconds or so, I saw that it figured out, okay, I eventually have more inserts than deletes, yeah, so there have been 25,000 values which are not longer valid, yeah, because of, I don't know, they're the sum of total sales. And on the other side, they got replaced, and there are even some more combinations. So in the end, there need to be you need to be doing 26,000 new inserts and 25,000 deletes of values to replicate that in the mirror database, where we will now have a look at. So the process finished here at 3 p.m. Looking at the mirroring status, we see, let's refresh that the last refresh was at 3 p.m. So we actually saw that like this, we pushed the data to this landing zone, which actually works pretty fast here. So it took like 30 seconds to run this notebook. It's pushed to the landing zone, and then it's also quickly picked up and merged to this table here. So if we switch to the Sequent Analytics endpoint, we can run this query here to see like how many items are now in this table, and we see that's 100,049 and 50, and that's exactly what we have on the Snowflake side. Yeah, I mean, we can manipulate that again. Let's say we delete some rows. So this might take a little bit to delete a big portion here. That's about 1 million rows have been deleted. So now we have not 54 million, but 53 million. The aggregated sale by date intensity view, it now has 148,000 values. So a little bit less combinations. And let's see what happens if we run the notebook again. So it eventually will have to do quite some updates and eventually delete more than it will insert. So now we see it's getting processed. It picks up this table again or view that it wants to process that. And it basically figured that it needs to do 26,000 changes. I need to work on the logging here, I guess, so you don't really see how much inserts and deletes they were. But let's just check in the mirror database if we see this changes reflected. So instead of 200,000 rows being worked on, we can now see they have been worked on 200,026 rows. This doesn't mean that the table is that big, but that there have been so many changes. Switching to the SQL Analytics endpoint, running the count, and we see 148, 186, 148, 186. We have exactly as many items in the mirrored table here that we have in the original view. And yeah, as I mentioned, so the only thing you need to run now to keep this view, to mirror this view constantly, I mean, you can create a schedule on this notebook. You can add it to a data pipeline. I mean, you could also say you create a notebook which triggers this notebook on a continuous basis here to have a loop around that, or you build your own version of this notebook where you have this loop included and run it, I don't know, for 12 hours and trigger it every 12 hours to kind of a fresh start. Doesn't hurt. So this is how you could set up this kind of continuous synchronization process, not only for one view, but I mean, it basically the notebook is set up to iterate over all the views you want to mirror. Yeah, so that you can use the same kind of notebook instance here to synchronize multiple views at once. Yeah, so you don't have to set up the same items multiple times. And this is it. This is how you can mirror Snowflake views with actually those tools which you already have in your Fabric toolkit. So use the solution from the GitHub repo. If you find some kind of issue, have some kind of ideas, just put it in the issues in the GitHub repo. That's the best place to place it. Also, if you want to contribute there, if you figured out the code and know how to make it better, feel free to contribute there. I open sourced it. Yeah, I hope the solution helps you, and also that the video helps you in setting them up. Thanks for watching. If you like videos like that, if you like more assets solutions like that, let me know. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and thank you very much. See you then. Bye.